so much. I think this answers the question if Long Island reads. Indeed, it does. It's wonderful to have such a wonderful crowd, and I thank you all for coming to hear me speak on this rainy day. It's been a great honor to be this year's, nominated book and author. And I'm going to stay to make sure at the end that I speak to everyone, sign all your copies. So don't feel that I'm going to rush out. I'm so grateful to be here. So just know that I will stay to answer every question and sign every book that wants to be signed. Okay. So I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about how I came to write The Lost Wife, the research that went about, and then also talk to you a little bit about how I approach writing as a painting and how the book was really conceived as an overall artistic composition, which sounds extremely ambitious. I'm not sure the jury's out if you think that I achieved that, but I will talk to you about the different techniques I use to sort of incorporate the same things that I do when I paint and when I see in an artistic way through my writing. And then, of course, I'll answer all your questions. So The Lost Wife, that's what we're here to talk about today. The Lost Wife, as Deb so lovingly gave a description, is not my first novel, it's my fourth novel. I write only historical fiction, probably because a lot of you here today like to learn while you're reading. I like to learn while I'm researching and then creating a book. I spend 3 years on every book. I research for over a year. I don't start to write the first sentence of any book until I feel that I'm inhabiting my research, that I call that I'm wearing it, so that I don't have to go through all my papers. I know it so well at that point that I can just start writing from my heart and my imagination. That said, it's like running a marathon. 3 years on one project is very intense. And 3 years working about something as difficult and as horrific as the Holocaust really takes an emotional toll. But it's a very important story to be told and to tell it from every angle possible. And in this case, I wanted to tell it through the eyes of an artist. All of my books start from a question that I don't know the answer to. For this book, the question was, how could art be created in the most horrific and difficult circumstances? I wasn't even sure when I first started the research for this book if there were any paintings that were done in the camps. I was just really trying to find out if the artistic need to express itself could be extinguished, could be taken from somebody. And clearly, since you've all, has everyone read the book? As if, I just don't want to give anything away. A few people haven't, but okay, you'll just have to bear with me. I'll talk to the crowd as if they have read the book. That art, the sense to create, the sense to document our experience of living and experiencing cannot be taken away from us. But by the end of writing this book, what I also learned is that the sense to connect to one another and to love could not be taken from people as well. So, from this initial question of how could art be created in the Holocaust, I started my first search for information. And the first seed of information that I got was a New York Times article about the artist Dina Gotlibova. For those of you who've read the book, Dina is the artist who did the mural of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs on the children's barracks in Auschwitz. And the article relayed how she was reported after she had done this mural by a Nazi officer to Mengele, not to get her in trouble, but because Mengele was looking for someone to document, and I use this word studies, we know what sort of horrific studies he was doing, but what he was doing on gypsies. And when approached by Mengele, when he said to her, I demand to do these drawings of the gypsies, she said, I want you to spare me and my mother the gas chambers. And surprisingly enough, he agreed to this. It's incredible that she had enough chutzpah to actually make a demand not just for herself to be spared, but her mother. But he did. And so this information gave me two answers. One, yes, someone took great risks to create art in the Holocaust, as she did with her mural. But also, in some cases, artistic skill enabled people to survive. So with those two seeds of information, I went down to the Holocaust Museum to listen to Dina's oral history. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with this, but Steven Spielberg funded something called the Shoah Initiative, the foundation, where every living survivor of the Holocaust who is willing to tell their story can have it documented on a video archive. And so scholars and writers or people who are interested can go down to DC to the library, and I can actually put in artists in Terezin, survivor Czechoslovakia, do a search in all sorts of different ways, and people's testimony will appear, and I can listen to it. So Dina had graciously done an oral history for the Shoah Foundation. It was 6 hours long, and it chronicled, she discussed her early life in Prague as a young art student in the 30s as anti-Semitism began to sweep through Europe, and then her initial deportation to Terezin, where she first worked in the Lauscher department, which, just to refresh your memory, is that small department in Terezin where people of artistic skill did these postcards that were sent back to Germany to be sold in 5 and dime stores. And just to give you an idea of how I listened to her story, because again, it was 6 hours and had a lot of information, she spoke just 2 sentences when she was talking about Lauscher, of how she remembered that there was a young girl who painted in the corner of this crowded room, and that this girl had an amazing ability to create gold leaf out of nothing. And that day after day, this girl did old master paintings that were sent back to Germany to be used for decorative purposes in high-ranking German officers' homes. But yet somehow, with no gold leaf, she created a sense of sparkling light on her canvas. And I remember thinking, here this woman, this young girl, doesn't even have a name. But she had this amazing talent that she could create gold leaf out of nothing, that she could create Rembrandt's gold, man with a golden helmet, that in such fine quality that it could be displayed in a high-ranking German officer's home, yet she did it out of almost thin air. And I wanted to sort of immortalize her and pay tribute to this footnote in someone's oral history, and to sort of just honor this person who had this talent and whose life was taken, too abruptly. So that's where you get the character of Teresa from just those 2 sentences that I give her life in the book. And that's really what I was hoping to do in the book, is to give life to all these people who were lost, who were taken in such horrible, horrible, dreadful ways, and to tell a story that needs to be told. So I returned back from that first trip in DC with a lot of information about how artists work in Terezin and how they created, and again, the sense that, yes, art was, in the sense to document, couldn't be extinguished. And my agent came to check in with me to see what I was writing. And I said, well, the next book is going to be about an artist during the Holocaust. And there was silence on the phone. And I started to say, the material that I had been harvesting for the book. And she said, Alyson, this sounds like it's going to be a very difficult book to sell. And Holocaust books, although it's an important story, it's very, very hard in this market to get any sort of interest in this. And I was very discouraged. But I am someone who doesn't give up, someone who has a definite sense of purpose in my life, and if I'm interested in something, it's something I'm going to follow through in. But I did get off the phone in sort of a frustrated way. And I had, my daughter was here today, Charlotte, was just a little baby at the time. And I had a babysitter for her, and I thought, well, I'm going to just do something proactive. I'll get my hair cut. So I always feel funny telling this story because it makes me sound like I'm a lady of leisure, but I'm not, believe me. So it was I went to this little place that you can just walk in to get a haircut. And I'm a really accomplished eavesdropper. And not because I'm a gossip. I just love a good story. So I was getting my hair cut, and I overheard the stylist next to me telling his client that someone had been in the day before who had gone to this wedding where the groom's grandfather and the bride's grandmother had never met before. And throughout the evening, the groom's grandfather kept on saying to the bride's grandmother, I know you from somewhere. I know you from somewhere. And she was trying to focus on the festivities around her and wasn't paying him too much attention. But at the end of the evening, he said, will you roll up your sleeve? And when she did, the 6-number tattoo of Auschwitz was inked into her skin. And he looked at her this time more closely, and he said, you were my wife. And I remember I heard that story, and it just knocked the breath out of me. I said, what? So you were my wife? They were married? How were they separated? What happened in those 65 years that caused their separation? What was their initial love story? I was filled with all these questions. And to me, that's the most wonderful way to start a novel, to give you those questions that make you interested, that you want to turn the next page, and you're captivated. So I tell this story, and I've probably told it about 200 times at this point, but I tell it because it just goes to show you that inspiration can hit you in the most unlikely places. Always eavesdrop, and always know that you can use something to get someone interested in something you're interested in. So I immediately thought this would be the perfect bookends to a story, that I could bring you in with those questions, and I could create the story of what caused their separation, what would their initial love story have been, who were the second people they married, and what were those stories of those marriages, and all these things that make it a deeper and richer book. And of course, this idea of now having two voices, the voice not just of the artist who survives in Terezin, but also the person that she loved before she was deported, the voice of Joseph, enriches the book so much more, because now we have two melodies that are woven into the book. The voice of Joseph, the voice of Lenka. And how do they deal with memory? You know, Lenka suppresses memory in order to survive. And when she does tell the story of how she was sent to Terezin and how she endured, her story is told in a linear way. And her voice is told in a very, the cadence of her words, the melody of her language is that it starts off like a tightly wound spool of thread. I was born Lenka Josephina Meisel, the daughter of a glass dealer. And it's very sort of clickety-clack until you start getting into what happens in the journey. And by the end, when she actually can acknowledge that she had a life and a love with Carl, and she can acknowledge that she has survived, her voice softens, it surrenders. And Joseph's voice is told almost like the strings, the violin legato that pulls through the book. And he doesn't tell the story from A to Z. He tells it when memory hits him, when it comes to him and is haunting at night. So with those stories, I bring that up because it'll deal with how I use, or I hope to use, language like paint, with texture, and with to sort of move you through like brushstrokes through the story. And that there's contrast. There's a contrast in the palette, the way the book is told, that you have the colors of the first love between Joseph and Lenka told in these vibrant reds of the strawberries and the green valleys of Karlovy Vary. But then the second marriages that they have that are born out of so much loss and out of a need to survive, those are the ink washes, the grays, the diluted blues. Amalia is drawn in these colors of sort of dishwater grays. And so there are all sorts of, a play on language and color and texture to sort of evoke these images and these emotions through color. This is a good way to funnel in about my background with art. I am the daughter of an abstract oil painter and an electrical engineer. So I think the part of me being fastidious about my research and wanting to learn and to harvest as much material and put a story together with the different pieces is my father. But my mother, she really at a young age taught me how to see in a unique way. When I was 6 years old, I brought home a painting from school, and I said to my mother, "Isn't it great? Don't you think this is a wonderful painting?" And my mother said, "Alyson, a painting is only great if it's interesting from all directions." And she held it up like this, and she said, "Well, do you think it's interesting this way?" And I said, "Yes, that's why I drew it this way. It's the way I did it." And then she turned it like this and said, "Well, do you still think it's interesting? And what do you think it looks like now? What do you think of the space in the right-hand corner or the left-hand side?" And she did it until it was a full circle and had me look at it from all directions. That's what I was trying to do with The Lost Wife, was have you see it from the angles of all directions. Lenka's not just tells her story through the eyes of an artist during the Holocaust. She's also a daughter, a sister, a young lover, then a young wife, and eventually a grandmother. So as you go through the book, each of the sacrifices that she's forced to make are seen from different perspectives of those different roles, and the different love connections she makes with those different roles. Same with Joseph. My mother also told me, I always found it being funny when I say my mother also told me, but she also taught me how the sense of color theory, that one color looks different next to another color. Blue seems one way next to its complement of orange, the blue looks next to green or purple. So when you think of using those theories against the characters, that Joseph looks one way next to Lenka than he does next to Amalia. And Amalia looks one way next to Joseph than she does next to Isaac. So each character thrust against the other character changes because we're all different when we're placed against a different person. And I was trying to do that when I was telling the story too, just to show how we're all multifaceted, and one person will bring out the light in you or the shadow. So this sense of lightness and darkness that we have with each other, when interacting with each other, is something that you can think about when you read how the different characters interplay in The Lost Wife. So the other thing that I like to talk about, and because it's very important to me, is to pay tribute to the survivors who helped me write this book. For those of you who are going on the Lost Wife tour, Dagmar Leibova was my tour guide in Terezin, and she herself was a survivor, and shared me her whole story of being a young girl in Prague and being transported to Terezin, and gave me all sorts of details about what it was like to be there. And to me, I'm so indebted to her because she made her story, her details of her story, I think, made the book not only emotionally more authentic, but historically and descriptively. For example, she told me how she remembered her mother boiling the sheets in coffee so that they wouldn't appear dirty. And I remember that just that simple description of what her mother did. It's something I could have never imagined doing, but it showed such foresight, and it showed such a sense of dignity that she didn't want her family to be sleeping on sheets that appeared dirty. Another survivor shared to me how she got to America, how she had found a letter under a bicycle that had a Jewish sounding name on the return address of the United States, and how she wrote to this person saying what was happening to her in Vienna and her family, and he agreed to sponsor her and her sister because they shared the same birthday with him. And then how the sister was turned away when they went to join the boat. So these are all sorts of details that are woven into the book, not to mention all the details of what it was like to be in Terezin with the overcrowding, the disease, just all those horrible things that I describe in the book. And I describe them in a way that I didn't want to be gratuitously grotesque in the language, because I didn't want you not to make it so that you didn't want to read the book. But I wanted to make the language evocative and real and a full sensory of experience of what it was like to be there, so that you were brought into that world and you could imagine it. Because when I write, I sort of see it in my mind, and then I have to, get it onto the page somehow that makes it interesting to you as readers. There's sort of a siphoning that goes on to make it happen that way. But I really am just very thankful for the people who shared their stories with me, because at the end of the day, I did want this to represent an accurate description of what happened in this very dark period in history. So I am going to read to you a small 3 pages or so from the book, just so you can hear in my voice The Lost Wife, and then I will answer any questions that you might have. Okay? Was everyone able to hear me back there? Were you able to hear me? Okay. This is embarrassing, but I'm going to take off my shoes. Okay. Okay, this is in the voice of Lenka at the end of the book. And this is really representative when I tell you how her language changes when she's able to acknowledge what her second marriage has been for her. Although I never uttered another word about Auschwitz to my family, I still dreamed of it. If you have lived through such a hell, it never leaves you. Like the smell of the crematorium that is forever in the back of my nose, my dreams of Auschwitz are always at the back of my mind, despite all the efforts I've made to push them away. How many times did I dream of the last time I saw my mother, my father, my sister? Every one of their faces appeared to me like apparitions over the years. But it was the dream where I'm in Auschwitz with my daughter Lisa that was always the worst. That one, when it came, tortured me for days. The dreams changed as Elisa changed. When she became a teenager, my daughter grew lazy like her American friends. How many times did I ask her to clean her room, pick up her clothes, or help me peel a bowl full of vegetables before her father came home from work? But Elisa never tolerated such tedium. It was all about meeting her friends or boys. And in those years, my dreams always begin with the selection process at Terezin. She is standing next to me, my beautiful daughter. And in my dream, I am begging the SS officer to send her to the right with me. I tell him, please, she is a good worker. I beg him to send her to the line that I'm in. But always in the dream, he is prying our hands apart. He sends my daughter to the left, and I awaken, my nightgown wet with perspiration, and Carl comforting me, whispering that it was only a terrible dream. It was always in those moments when my husband held me that I knew I was lucky to have found him. Those hands on my shoulders never lost their warmth during all the years of our marriage. They were always the hands of the young soldier who found me in the DP camp, who brought me a blanket and a warm meal, who told me in broken German that he was Jewish too. Every night as I went to bed, I looked at the black and white photograph of him in his army uniform, his thick head of hair, his dark brown eyes full of compassion. Compassion he had since the first day. This is how I filled the canvas of our marriage. I filled it with gratitude. For no matter what else happened, I would always think of Carl as the one who saved me. He Americanized my name to Lainey and gave me a good life with a healthy daughter. She learned the highly prized craft of art restoration and became a mother herself to my beautiful Eleanor. Eleanor, who inherited her swan-like grace from my mother and made heads turn whenever she walked into a room. She took to languages the way a duck takes to water. At her graduation from Amherst, she took home nearly every prize. When Carl fell ill, I finally became the caretaker in our marriage. I held his head when he needed to vomit, and I made him only soft food when his stomach couldn't digest anything else. When the chemo claimed his thick white hair, I told him he was still my handsome soldier. I held his brown spotted hand to my lips and kissed it every morning and every night. Sometimes I'd even place in the center of my half-button nightgown so he could feel the beating of my heart. I could see the end of my painting of my marriage, and I was racing to fill it with just a few strokes more. I will tell you, though I am a deeply private person, that our last moment together was perhaps our most beautiful. That final night after he had been tucked into bed, I had given him his pain medication and was getting ready to take a bath. "Come here," he managed to whisper. "Come next to me before the medicine clouds my head." I believe those who have the luxury to die in their own bed can often sense when the end is near, and this was the case with Carl. His breathing suddenly became labored, his skin took an unearthly pallor, but in his eyes there was a fierceness, a determination to use every ounce of his powers to see me clearly for the last time. I took his hand in mine. "Put the music on, Lainey," he whispered. I stood up and went to the old photograph and put on his favorite record by Glenn Miller. Then I returned to sit next to him, slipping my old wrinkled hand in his. With all his strength, my Carl gently raised his arm as if he were about to lead me in a dance. He swayed his elbow and my arm followed his lead. He smiled through the cloud of medication. "Lainey," he said, "you know I have always loved you." "I know," I told him, and squeezed his hand so hard I feared I might have hurt him. 52 years. His voice was barely now a whisper, but he was smiling at me with those dark brown eyes. And then it was as if my old heart finally tore open. I could feel the shell that I had so carefully maintained for all those years come undone. And the words, the feelings inside seeped out like sap from an old forgotten tree. It was there in our bedroom with the old faded curtains and the furniture we had bought so many years before that I told him how much I loved him too. I told him how, for 52 years, I had been blessed to spend my life with a man who helped me, protected me, and gave me a daughter who was strong and wise. I told him how his love had turned a woman who only wanted to die after the war into someone who had a full and beautiful life. "Tell me again, Lainey," he whispered. "Tell me again." And so I told him again and again, my words like a cottage for the man who was not my first love, but a love all the same. I told him until he was finally gone. That's my husband over there with my children. Sorry, I just want to say thank you, because it was very hard to write The Lost Wife, and I wanted to say thank you to him. Okay, so questions and answers. Does anyone have a